This story, titled The Secret That Broke My Heart, starts on an ordinary morning. But what happened next would haunt me for the rest of my life. My name is Emily. I'm 49 years old, and I live in a small but cozy home just outside a quiet town in the Midwestern United States. It's the kind of place where everyone knows your name, and nothing much ever changes. Or so I thought. My life with Paul, my partner of 23 years, had always seemed peaceful and full of promise. But now, looking back, I realize how easily we can become blind to things right in front of us. I never expected anything to rock the boat. We had a nice home, a beautiful garden, and the kind of relationship people envied. Sure, we had our share of little squabbles, but nothing major. He had his work, I had mine. Routine, predictable. Then came that day, that one moment that changed everything. I was cleaning the living room when I noticed something strange on the kitchen counter. A phone. At first, I assumed it was his, but then I saw the case. It was different, not the kind he usually picks. It was sleek, modern, something I would never have chosen for him. I hesitated, then picked it up. It wasn't unlocked. I could see the light blink on the screen, indicating a message was waiting. My heart raced. I told myself to leave it alone, that it was probably just a work phone, something to do with his job. But in that moment, the seed of doubt was planted. Why hadn't he told me about it? We had always been open with each other about everything, so why was he hiding this? I didn't touch it after that. I put it down, walked away, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Later that night, I decided to ask Paul about the phone. It felt like a small thing, so I tried to sound casual, as though it wasn't a big deal. "Hey, I saw a second phone on the counter today. Is that new?" I asked, trying to sound nonchalant. Paul looked up from his dinner, his eyes narrowing for just a second before he shrugged. "I don't know what you're talking about. You must be imagining things. There's only one phone." I froze. The way he said it, the way his tone shifted, made my stomach turn. "Are you sure?" I pressed, my voice trembling slightly. "It wasn't yours, Paul. It was different." His expression darkened for a split second before he quickly covered it up with a forced laugh. "You're overthinking this, Emily. It's probably just one of my old phones. Nothing to worry about." But even then, as he dismissed my concerns, I felt something stirring inside me. Something wasn't right. His insistence that I was imagining things only made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I wanted to believe him, but my gut was telling me otherwise. Days passed, and I couldn't let it go. The phone, though it had vanished from the counter, lingered in my thoughts. Every time Paul came home late from work, every time he seemed distracted or a little too defensive when I asked him about his day, that nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach grew. I noticed the little things now. The way he'd hide his phone when I entered the room, or how he'd take longer than usual to reply to my questions. But the most chilling thing was how he'd always brush off my concerns, telling me I was paranoid, telling me I needed to trust him. But trust felt so fragile now. The more I tried to convince myself that it was nothing, the more I found myself caught in a web of doubt. I even thought about confronting him again, asking him point blank why he was being so secretive, but each time I opened my mouth, the words got stuck. I knew what this could mean. I had heard the stories, the ones where people found out things they never wanted to know, things that changed everything. The idea of betrayal, of deceit, crept into my mind. But was I just being irrational? Could I really suspect the man I had shared my life with for so long of hiding something from me? The days passed in a haze of uncertainty. But one evening, things took a turn. I came home from my part-time job earlier than expected. I entered the house, the quiet humming of the refrigerator the only sound. Paul was in the den, his back to the door, sitting in his favorite armchair. I froze when I saw it, the second phone, sitting on the coffee table, not even hidden. I couldn't believe my eyes. I wanted to shout, to demand answers, but instead I walked over slowly, as if in a trance. I picked up the phone. This time, the screen was unlocked, and I could see the text messages. They weren't from anyone I recognized. I felt my pulse quicken as I read through the messages, each one more unsettling than the last. There were messages from a woman. The words were casual, flirty, and increasingly intimate. My breath caught in my throat. There was no mistaking what I was reading. I felt like the floor had fallen out from under me, the world spinning in slow motion. I couldn't breathe. My head was spinning. I dropped the phone back onto the table, stumbling backward as tears welled up in my eyes. How had I not seen this before? How had he kept it hidden? My mind raced with questions, each one more painful than the last. Was this the beginning of something bigger? Had our life together, the life I thought we had, been a lie? And yet, even with all the proof in front of me, I still felt paralyzed. My body was trembling, my thoughts tangled in a million different directions. I wanted answers, but I was terrified of what I might find. What had happened to the man I thought I knew? What had happened to the love we had built? But before I could process everything, I heard the door creak open behind me. Paul stood there, his face pale when he saw the phone on the table. "Emily, wait," he started, but I could barely look at him. The silence between us was thick, suffocating. And in that moment, I realized that nothing would ever be the same again. The following days were a blur of tension, confusion, and heartbreak. Paul insisted on explaining himself, but every word he spoke felt like another lie, another attempt to cover up something that I couldn't unsee. The way his voice trembled when he tried to justify himself only made my suspicions grow. I couldn't bring myself to look at him without seeing the messages on that phone, the words that haunted me like a shadow I couldn't shake off. He kept telling me it wasn't what I thought. "Emily, I swear it's not what you think," he said over and over. "You're taking it out of context. She's just a friend, someone from work." But there was something in his eyes. I could see the guilt there, the panic. It was like he was caught in his own lie, trying desperately to find a way out. But no matter how much he pleaded, I couldn't stop the doubt from festering in my heart. He wanted me to trust him. But how could I? Trust, once broken, was not so easily repaired. The pain was too raw, the betrayal too deep. Every time I looked at him, I saw the phone, the messages, and the truth I didn't want to face. I tried to stay calm, to ask him more questions, but his answers were all too vague, all too convenient. "Why didn't you tell me about her?" I asked one evening, my voice trembling. "Why keep this a secret?" Paul shifted uncomfortably in his chair, avoiding my gaze. "I didn't want to worry you. It was nothing. I never meant for it to go this far." But nothing about this felt like nothing. His words felt empty, rehearsed, like he was saying them because he thought that was what I wanted to hear, not because they were true. It was clear to me now that he had been hiding something much bigger, something I was only beginning to understand. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself walking through the motions of daily life, trying to pretend everything was fine. But the cracks in our relationship were widening, and I couldn't ignore them any longer. I couldn't ignore the ache in my chest, the constant wondering if I could ever trust him again. But then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, they did. One evening, I came home early from a meeting with friends, a slight smile on my face as I thought about how much I needed a relaxing night with Paul. But when I walked in the door, everything changed. The house was quiet, unnaturally so. I called out for him, but there was no response. I found myself standing in the middle of the living room, feeling a cold shiver run through me. Something was off. My instincts kicked in, and before I even knew what I was doing, I started searching through the house. It wasn't like me to invade his privacy, but after everything that had happened, I couldn't help myself. I needed to know the truth. I needed to see it with my own eyes. And that's when I found it. Hidden in a drawer in the study, just out of sight, another phone. This one was even newer than the last. I froze, my heart racing as I reached for it, my hands trembling. I couldn't believe it. The phone was locked, but I didn't need to see it to know what it was. I could feel it in my bones, the secrecy, the lies, the deception. My fingers hovered over the screen, but I couldn't bring myself to unlock it. Instead, I just sat there, in the silence of our home, holding that phone like it was the weight of the world. The realization hit me harder than anything before. This wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a betrayal that had been brewing for a long time. And Paul was hiding it all from me. I could feel the tears threatening to spill, but I refused to let them fall. I had spent too many years trying to build a life with him, trying to make things work, only to be blindsided by the truth. Paul came in moments later, and his eyes immediately locked on the phone in my hands. His face went pale, his lips parted as though he had something to say, but no words came. For the first time, I saw the fear in his eyes. I saw the reality of what he had done, and I felt my heart break all over again. "Emily, please," he said, his voice shaky. "Let me explain." I shook my head, tears welling up in my eyes. "Explain? How can you explain this, Paul? How can you explain lying to me, hiding things from me? You've been doing this for months, haven't you? How long has it been going on?" He didn't answer at first. Then, finally, he spoke, his voice low. "It was just a mistake. It didn't mean anything. I never meant for it to get this far. But the damage was done. The trust I had in him, the love I thought we shared, had been shattered beyond repair. No words, no excuses could fix it. And in that moment, I knew. I knew this was the end. I took the phone, placed it on the table between us, and looked at Paul one last time. I don't know who you are anymore, I said quietly. I don't know if I can ever trust you again, and I can't keep living like this. The silence between us was deafening. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then finally, Paul stood up and walked out of the room, his head hung low. I didn't chase after him. I didn't have to. I knew what I had to do now. I had to let go. And as I sat there, in the quiet of our once happy home, I realized that sometimes the hardest thing to do isn't walking away. It's knowing when to let go. If this story resonates with you, please like, comment, and subscribe.